Hello and welcome to the Josh and Tyler Show. I'm here with Tyler, as always, with two S for fucking fantastic. Today we're tying down our top 10 war movies, and no, not the war between me and him deciding which is the best Ghibli movie, but simply what are war movies or movies that take place during war. Tyler, how are we doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right, thanks. Thanks for giving me such a hard topic to make a list on.
I think this is the hardest topic I think we've ever done on this show.
Yeah, full disclaimer, audience members, we are probably going to struggle in this video more than we have in any other one, which is weird because we talked about a lot of tougher shit in previous videos. So this is really saying something.
Yeah, there's just literally so many freaking movies I wanted to put on the top six.
Yeah,
Could have been a top 20 for me, and I would have been just fine filling that list out.
for
Easy.
sure.
Y'all got some honorable mentions, Tyler?
I do have some honorable mentions, and some people are going to be really surprised considering the ones that are officially on my list. I do consider Full Metal Jacket an honorable mention because while the boot camp scenes, especially featuring Vincent D'Onofrio and Arlie Ermy, are incredibly intense and almost come across as more of a psychological horror movie than there is a war, which is just a great way of examining PTSD in soldiers before they're even on the battlefield. So that really says a lot. The reason it's not higher on my list is that when they get to the actual Vietnam sequences, they don't have the same weight without either one of those actors. It's unfortunate. Like the rest of the movie is still very good, don't get me wrong, and it kind of demystifies certain Vietnam War tropes. Like it's not taking place in the jungle, it's taking place in like
Hmm.
burnt down, destroyed cities that are more reminiscent of World War II, which actually feels a lot more authentic, all things considered. It's just Stanley Kubrick's most mainstream movie is technically still one of his best, but there are just other ones that I have more respect in regards to that one. I thought about putting the MASH movie in regards to a war comedy, but MASH has not aged well as a movie just because the ideas of rebellion and fighting the government really come across as more mean-spirited. It's really unfortunate when Hawkeye and Trapper John are accidentally the villains and Hot Lips and Ferret Face Frank. That's Ferret Face's
I forgot
actual
their
name.
names.
Frank. I liked the nicknames. I love the MASH TV show. That
Oh,
gets war comedy drama spot on in my opinion. But the movie is I don't really know what it is. Like the heroes are evil and the villains, even though they're religious authoritarians, are technically still decent-hearted people. But the idea of counterculture in the 60s and 70s just hasn't aged well on that end. And there were a couple other war movies that technically take place during a war, like The Wind Rises and Howl's Moving Castle, which are movies I actually like more than the selections on this list, but it's really hard to categorize them as war oriented, considering a lot of it takes place in civilian life where there really isn't that much destruction going around them, and so it doesn't really phase them except for certain scenes towards the climax.
yeah, I have a long list of these honorable mentions. Hacksaw Ridge. I love this movie.
You'll
Uh,
see that on mine.
That's a great, great film. Vince Vaughn gives one of the best performances of his life. Andrew Garfield is phenomenal. Great script, great movie. I like the different take it has. Tora,
All
Tora,
true.
Tora. The Pearl Harbor bombings from the Japanese perspective is a fantastic late '60s
Which
movies. Tora,
which
Tora,
one's it called?
Tora, Tora, Tora.
Doesn't ring a
Yeah, but
bell.
it's from the Japanese perspective as they're bombing Pearl Harbor, which is phenomenal. The 3.5 hour epic, the German submarine movie, Das Boot, incredible film. I've watched this too many times to count. Kelly's Heroes, a Clint Eastwood, Don Rickles bank robbery movie set in World War II in the last few days there. 1917 is incredible, phenomenal. There's just so many other movies that came before it I wanted to talk about. Overlord. J.J. Abrams produced Overlord, a zombie film set in World War II, is absolutely amazing. Rocky 4 single-handedly ended the Cold War. I'm sure Tyler's probably heard me say that. Bridge on the River Kwai, absolutely phenomenal war film about building a bridge. The Longest Day, this is the most technical of the war films on here. Basically about the landing on Normandy beaches and the technical aspects. It's the better version of Christopher Nolan's whatever completely out of order movie. They Shall Not Grow Old. Peter Jackson's
Right.
documentary that he fully restored all the World War One footage. The Dirty Dozen about Canadian criminals being this sort of bombing squad
Yeah.
during World War II. Stalag 17. This is the first version we get to see of Schultz. This is my shout out to Hogan's Heroes, which is wonderful, and he's this sort of German who helps people escape from World War II. I like war movies, Tyler. Um,
Well, I thought this list was hard on me, so
Yeah, when
this
I
ought to be
say, I
something.
will clarify, when I say The Longest Day, it basically does the events of landing on Normandy Beach in a technical aspect with the timestamps, but it does it in order of the operation. So it cuts around as opposed to whatever willy nilly the director decides to do, and I appreciate that more than Christopher Nolan's completely upside down and backwards take when the movie should have just been forward and made it a lot better.
I don't know. I actually like the structure that he went with on Dunkirk. And Dunkirk is another honorable mention just because it's more of a very simplistic survival movie that takes place during Normandy. I love that it's as visually told of a movie as Christopher Nolan is ever going to be, as far as I'm concerned. It's one of the few times where he really treats the audience with 100% respect by, again, playing it out of order, trying to like play with our expectations, and also raising the stakes, because even if you don't pick up on it, there's still a level of suspense to the way they structure the narratives over the course of a week, a day, or even just a couple of hours. There's always this sense of urgency no matter what. And plus, the actors that he does get, regardless of how big or low they are, it's rare that I can say that Harry Styles is good in a movie, but you know what? He was legitimately good as the war movie scumbag. And there is one other honorable mention that I saw this in high school. I didn't really think much of it until recently. Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker,
Oh, yes. I forgot about that one.
which covers a lot of stuff that war movies don't, not just like bomb explosives teams, which you don't actually see very often. I don't think they ever get acknowledged in that many war movies, but also Jeremy Renner's performance as someone who goes to war just to escape boredom of everyday life is a very uncompromising and almost unsympathetic route, or at least it could have gone in an unsympathetic route. But they do a good job at highlighting that it's the most exciting part of his life and that he wouldn't trade it for anything else, regardless of how much it shell shocks him.
Yeah, and I'll also add Heartbreak Ridge to here because I'm a Clint Eastwood fan. I think it's a great flick, and
I
it
thought
takes
you were going
place
to
during
say
the
that.
Gulf War. I don't actually have any movies with the Gulf War on my list here, so
None of us do. And like, I've never seen Jarhead, or Three
mm,
Kings, so I wouldn't count
both
any of
very good
those.
films. But again, there was just so many films off the top of my head. Tyler, at number six, what do you got? This tough list.
Number six, I have a war comedy, which I had to put on here somewhere just because it's really difficult to make a lighthearted portrayal of very difficult subject matters such as death, bigotry, and denial in general, let alone during some of the worst moments in human history, such as World War II. And as much as my dad will probably kill me when he sees this video because I didn't watch Stripes, which is probably a much more
Okay,
hilarious
I
war
will tell
comedy
you
than what
that
I'm about to
Stripes
do here.
is great for one half of the movie. The second half is just it just didn't do anything for me. I like it, but I just think it's got really bad pacing. It sort of like jumps to a completely different genre without being justified. So
Well, thanks for letting me know ahead of time. But it's one of those movies my dad can watch like over and over again and still be out of breath laughing. So that was one that I wanted to check out but still hadn't got to. But I knew for a fact that you were going to agree with me on this, that one of the best war movies ever is the war comedy Jojo Rabbit from Taika Waititi,
yeah,
which given our current political climate, it's a
uh
miracle
huh,
that this movie even got made. In fact, from what I understand, it took Waititi 8 years to get this project even off the ground, probably before he even decided that he was going to play Hitler. You know, Polynesian Jew playing the worst human in history ever.
yeah. This
But yeah, in my opinion, Waititi did a really good job at balancing the comedy and drama by simultaneously shifting between them back and forth almost within a split second, just to highlight the amount of delusion that the citizens of Germany were living in during the last few days of the World War, especially that one scene where Jojo chases a butterfly and comes across a pair of shoes.
yeah.
And for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I'm not going to spoil what happens there because that is like the pivotal scene. It had like everyone in the theater when I went to see it just completely, for lack of a better word, shell shocked, which is exactly what we were
Ah,
supposed to feel. It's insane. And it definitely helps that we have 4 terrific lead performances from Roman Griffin Davis, Thomasin McKenzie, Scarlett Johansson, and of course Taika Waititi as Adolf Hitler himself. And we'll get to him in a second, but I was really surprised by the arc that every lead character was sharing, because they were each dealing with loneliness in a different way. In Johansson's case, she feels very lonely with the fact that she's the only one who can see clearly about what kind of situation her country's in, and is trying to fix that by helping as many people come to their senses as possible, or at the very least, hiding as many people as possible, like Thomasin McKenzie, who is so withdrawn and lonely in this one attic that she's forced to live in order to survive, that she's willing to talk to a Hitler youth that is incredibly bigoted in order to have a conversation with anyone and just make light of the situation just by playing against their stereotypical viewpoints towards her. And with Roman Griffin Davis, he has probably the hardest job out of all the actors, because he has to come across as likable and endearing, even though he is anti-Semitic, racist, in complete denial of the situation. And it takes him until about halfway through the movie just to take step 1 of his overall arc of acknowledging that he was wrong about certain things. He was wrong to believe the lies that he was force-fed out of fear and pressure from the other people, because he just desperately wants to fit in with someone. That's really all he wants. And that's the part that still makes him incredibly endearing. And that's what makes the chemistry between Davis and McKenzie feel so authentic. And with Taika Waititi,
first time performance from a kid, so
yeah, which was weird. I mean, he comes from a little bit of a Hollywood family. His parents are like crew members in certain stuff. Like his father was a cinematographer for some Marvel movies, actually. So that might have been how Waititi discovered the kid. I'm not entirely sure, but let's get to Waititi as Hitler, because people are incredibly split over the way Nazis are portrayed in this movie. But with Waititi as Hitler in particular, not only does it feel realistic that he's the imaginary kid of an 11-year-old by speaking in such a juvenile and immature way. Like, my favorite quote of the entire thing from him is just like, let them say what they all want to say. People used to say nasty things about me all the time. Oh, that guy's a lunatic. Oh, look at that one. He's going to get us all killed. It's just so hilarious. The bit where he's just like, well, I got to go. And then just like dives out of the window. It's absolutely hilarious. They have no problem poking fun at what a stupid concept it is to have him as an imaginary friend. But when Jojo does start to come to his senses, starts to question his own ideology, that's when his imaginary friend turns into the very embodiment of everyone that's trying to force feed these really horrible viewpoints. And he turns into an incredibly despicable beast like you would expect Heil Hitler to do. And to all the people who, for whatever reason, think that this movie promotes Nazism by portraying them as lighthearted doofuses, that's how you piss them off. That's how you make them look stupid. That's how you expose what an inconsistent and illogical ideology Nazism is. You can't prove that something is wrong unless you absolutely show it. I'm pretty sure your favorite moment is when Stephen Merchant shows up as the Gestapo. It's just like, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler.
Yeah.
Every fucking time you introduce themselves.
My other favorite Hitler moment is, do you think these pants are too puffy?
But yeah, like,
no, I think it's perfect amount of puff.
But yeah, like you can't point out that burning books is a stupid concept without having people just like jumping for joy at destroying something that they've never even read, probably had never even heard of up until this point. And of course, Sam Rockwell as the captain who lost his eye in a completely preventable accident, along with Theon Greyjoy, who does he say anything? Because I don't actually remember him talking.
Also, Rebel Wilson is hilarious in this film.
She is, yeah. I love how enthusiastic she is towards something that she has absolutely no real concept of.
Jojo, take this gun, run into battle, shoot anything that moves.
Yeah, like, and plus during the final battle where the Germans start to lose the war and they're so desperate that they're tricking kids into being suicide bombers, like, it's incredibly clear Nazis are stupid and evil. And it reminded me of this one World War on Terror comedy called Four Lions, where Riz Ahmed and a few others like sneak off from Britain to join Al Qaeda. Yeah, and describing that plot, it's no wonder people haven't heard of it.
I'd probably give it a shot though if it's comedy, because they might have something to say. You never know.
Yeah, but like I heard about it through like a Screen Junkies video of movies you haven't seen but are
Hmm.
great. And when he described Four Lions, he looks at Hal and Dan and goes, you guys like comedy, right? Yeah, yeah. Do you guys like Islamic terrorism? Uh and he's just
Uh,
like, in my opinion, I would argue that this does a lot more to make fun of terrorism as opposed to portraying someone like 24 or Homeland, where the terrorists are the
hmm.
big evil forces out to get us. But in Four Lions, The Great Dictator, and Jojo Rabbit, especially, it's just so much more satirical and poetic to paint the villains as bumbling idiots who can't get shit done. And
Yeah.
considering how Nazism has went from tens of millions to thousands, depending on what country you're in, it's working.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of. I really, really now wish I put Team America World Police on here, but my list is
Oh
or
man. For that matter, so should have I.
and Top Secret was also one I also considered. That one's really funny. World War II spy movie. Same guy
Not
who did
enough
Airplane,
people.
so
Yeah, and like that very video that I talked about where I discovered Four Lions, Dan Murrell was describing Top Secret as like the Zucker brothers movie that nobody remembers but is
oh
actually
man,
good.
I've watched that movie so many times.
I've only seen like bits of it for the trailer. Like
But
I
it's
love
so
Airplane.
so good.
Naked Gun is kind of hit and miss for me
Oh,
because I don't think Leslie Nielsen is a good leading character. I kind of prefer him as a side character,
tell me that Connor scene isn't
like
hilarious.
with Airplane and the Scary Movie franchise when he joined halfway through.
Oh, but I mean, when they're standing on top of the bleachers after Carter Montalban falls off and he gets run over by the marching band and then the cement mixer, and he just looks at the other guy, he's like, yeah, my father went the same way. Tell me that's not funny.
I can't.
I love Naked Gun. Or the full body size condoms really makes me laugh. My number six is a war comedy as well from one of my favorite human beings who's no longer with us. Good Morning Vietnam! I love this movie. This is a two perspective movie where you see Robin Williams playing a radio show announcer and host who plays music and basically entertains the troops during the Vietnam War. But it's also, a lot of it will make us laugh. And we'll laugh really hard at how's the weather, scorching, burning hot out there. And it's just Robin Williams doing his improv thing. It's pretty much if the genie was on the mic at your local radio station. And everyone's giving him flack and telling him, no, don't do this, don't do that. And he's doing it anyway, and eventually he gets fired. But we also see the other side of the war where he sees kids suicide bombers and the soldiers and the impact it has on them and the way businesses are affected and everything along there. And it's all of a suddenly hilariously funny and then incredibly dark, and you're like, holy crap, Robin Williams can't make us laugh all the time. um, this is a phenomenal, I think, maybe one of the best Robin Williams performances, because as much as I love him in the little bit he has to do in Dead Poet Society, or and I'm gonna give an unpopular one here. I like Patch Adams. No one else does. I really think it's funny and whimsical.
Uh,
I know a
my
lot of
my
people
dad
don't
will
like it.
defend it. I don't know why he does, but he
I
will.
like it. It always makes me feel good at the end. And the villain doctor in that one, but this one is really. I don't remember the villain. I don't remember everything about it. I watched it last week because I love it so much. But I always remember Robin Williams making me laugh through war, and that's something you don't often see in a war film. If you go for like a JoJo or a Top Secret, they laugh on the topical matter or the parody of it. But this is taking the war as seriously as it is, and then also, well, giving us those laughs as well, which I think is a very fine balance of pacing. And this movie could have been an absolute disaster. We could be sitting here talking about how this is the most mismanaged, most misthought out movie of the entire war series because they disrespected the soldiers or did something like that. But it doesn't do that. It just makes you laugh. It's like, here's this radio guy trying to make people laugh. And I think the lasting impact of this movie is every time we watch it, or I watch it, I don't know, maybe, I think you love it because you raised your arms.
It's
Um,
good. Yeah.
he makes us laugh, but he also, the way the soldiers who are covered in mud or in the trucks or driving by, the way just the radio announcers making them laugh through this time of horrific combat and napalm and Agent Orange and all these terrible things and the guerrilla combat. And I think it's just a masterpiece, and that's why I wanted to make my list not just World War II films from the 1950s. Are
Oh
there
no,
any thoughts
trust me,
on
that's
this one?
totally fair. Yeah, you know what? The reason I raised my hand was just because I can't believe I didn't think of this selection of all things. It is insane. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It was so essential to have him be the main character in order to not like goof off just because he's an asshole, like the villain of the movie seems to think so. And like, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of Robin Williams movies where the villains just don't get the joke for no real reason other than they're stuck up. But considering this takes place in the military,
Yeah.
it makes total sense why they would be pissed off because they view everyone with such a high level of honor and respect. And the one time you make a slight joke about any of that, all of a sudden you're an asshole. And this movie was so ahead of its time in regards to freedom of speech and a sense of humor. And the fact that they put it in the middle of a war is just a spot on metaphor. And it definitely helps that there are subplots about Adrian Kronar because Adrian Kronar was a real life DJ. That's the most shocking thing about this was that it is a true story in some capacity. But if we didn't have the subplot about him being an ESL teacher, falling in love with one of his students, and at least was he a teacher or was he just attending English as a second language?
I honestly, I know that he did a school thing. It's really not important.
But yeah, like if he didn't fall in love with that one girl and had quarrels with the brother who is instantly disapproving of him just because he's from America and Americans are tearing up the country for better or worse in this case, if those subplots weren't in there, we wouldn't have seen the side of him that was so endearing and concerned about the well-being of not just American soldiers, but just for human beings in general. That's where his material comes from. It's not just so the other soldiers can make light of it and survive. It's so he can maintain his sanity at all times because that one big flip out in the middle of the battlefield where he just throws his hat and goes, "This is not going on my resume." Like that really sums it up. He doesn't want to be there, but he knows he has to make the best of it. And more importantly, he has to put in the effort to do so. Plus, it has one of the best movie insults ever where he looks at his commanding officer, knowing he's won, and just goes, "You're in more dire need of a blowjob than any white man in history."
Also, this is a really important movie for Robin Williams because this is sort of his big career break because he did Mork and Mindy in the 70s and then he had like things like Popeye and yeah. This is his big sort of break, and then he got Dead Poet Society, and everything just sort of rolled out from there. Tyler, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is kind of sort of the Mel Gibson comeback in regards to him as a director. Because for a while, people just knew him as the guy who made Passion of the Christ. The very few people who have seen Apocalypto, which is really good,
Phenomenal.
would have put this on here if it was a war, but I wouldn't really call it that. It seemed more like a survival story of all things. But this is one of those true life stories where you watch it and you can't believe that this shit actually happened. Like there's obviously some historical liberties and you can tell which scenes were completely made up when you watch them. But Hacksaw Ridge is just so impactful when you discover that there was a real life Forrest Gump who walked into danger and not only saved 4 people during the Battle of Okinawa, but he saved 75 people. Corporal Desmond Doss, the only conscientious objector to win the Medal of Honor, because as a conscientious objector, I told you guys that we were going to struggle throughout this video.
It's a word.
Yes, it's a word to describe someone who refuses to carry a gun, refuses to kill anyone, but he still wants to voluntarily go into the army to be a combat medic. As he puts it best, we're all about tearing the world apart. I'm all about putting it back together. That's the word that he describes when he is on trial for disobeying a direct order, because during basic training, he won't fire a gun. He refuses to do so. And even though he pleads not guilty, he'll flat out say, I did disobey a direct order but technically I don't have to follow that order. And there's that great scene where Hugo Weaving, who was incredibly underrated in this. I'm glad that Andrew Garfield got the Oscar nomination, but I felt like Hugo Weaving could have been Best Supporting Actor just for what he did in the first half, because while his character is nothing new, like a World War veteran who is completely disillusioned by the stuff that he saw on the battlefield and has become the tough love father, Weaving gives so much heart to the character that makes him seem so above average as a cliched character that he is. And that's the great thing about all of the actors in this movie. They all play very stereotypical war movie characters, but Gibson is so good at directing actors that he gets them to basically elevate the material that they're given. You're absolutely right that this is one of Vince Vaughn's best performances ever. And I was so scared that he was going to bomb, because the only dramatic performance I had ever seen him do was be an FBI agent in the cell, and he was so over the top
Maybe
in that.
Swingers, that's about as dramatic as his career got.
It was at that point, but like after Hacksaw Ridge and working again with Mel Gibson on Dragged Across Concrete, I have much more faith in him as a dramatic actor now, because not only is he an incredibly convincing drill sergeant, he was so good the opening scene where he just roasts everyone like it's nobody's business, but you can definitely tell he does genuinely care about Doss whenever he gets the shit kicked out of him for supposedly being a coward. He flat out says, there's no shame in leaving now. You still have a choice, and I will gladly do it for you, because you genuinely believe he's one of the few soldiers who doesn't do it for honor and glory, but to help people. And helping people includes helping out your own men. Luke Bracey being the biggest surprise out of all the performances, because for one, he's not a very good actor, and if you've ever seen Holiday, you know that his career is not going anywhere after that. But he was the biggest surprise as the skeptic, the bully who instantly deems Doss a coward just because refusing to pick up a gun on the surface just makes you seem incredibly lazy and effortless compared to the other soldiers. But the fact that Doss is so willing to stand up to his moral principles, that he won't sell out the people who beat the shit out of him, the fact that he'll walk into clear and present danger without a weapon in order to rescue people, himself included, he takes that as a genuine sign of respect. And the material handles these characters so well. Andrew Garfield, this is absolute proof after Amazing Spider-Man that he still has what it takes. He is so incredible. He made me tear up a few times during the battle sequences, because one of the great things about Hacksaw Ridge is that the first half is a human drama, kind of like Full Metal Jacket, but it's done so efficiently. And then once they get to the Battle of Okinawa, it becomes completely chaotic. The battle sequences were a lot of fun. Mel Gibson actually knows what a tripod is, so the battles are all that'll be ironic considering my number one, but like you can see, you might not know who's shooting where, but you can see who's getting blown to bits. You can tell who's like firing stuff, getting bayonets. You can tell who Doss is going to rescue at a given moment. They actually do treat the Japanese troops with a certain degree of respect, because there are a couple scenes where Doss will hand gauze to a wounded soldier, or when Hacksaw Ridge has been taken over, they have that ritualistic seppuku where they accept defeat, but not without honor and dignity. So it is it's not, I don't know whether or not to call it an anti-war movie, but it is a pro-soldier and pro-human movie, like a lot of the choices on my list here. And the only real problems I can say is that during the battle sequences, for one, it started off with a jump scare of the, hey, I'm not really dead body thing, because and even when I was in the theater, I just sat there, I'm like, please do not have a soldier jump at you pussies. And then because Mel Gibson does film the battle sequences on a tripod, once in a while you can kind of see some crappy green screen or some digital firing shots, but outside of that, that's really all I got. Hacksaw Ridge is incredible.
Yeah, Vince Vaughn in Cell Block 99 or whatever. Brawl in Cell Block 99.
That's right.
I just watched that, and I never want to see it again. Great movie. I never want to see it again. That's how
thanks for letting me know that now, because that's how he met S. Craig Zoller, and that's how he ended up doing Concrete with Mel Gibson.
Phenomenal, but
Zoller's a brutal son of a bitch.
But I do like the emotional side when he goes to give blood randomly at the hospital multiple times just to get the girl and such. I always think that's really nice.
I don't remember that much of Teresa Palmer, but I know that she was good in it.
Yeah, that was really, really nice. And then on the base where they're running laps and stuff, and he gets up extra early and does all that, I really like that that bit in his character there. It's a very enduring movie, and when I think that moment when the bodies keep coming down after they lost the ridge, and they're like, where are they coming from? And there's just this, like, I don't know, it just made me feel like, like, oh, like, yeah, like, I love that.
Yeah, when he came up with the rope and swinging them down, I just sat there. I'm like,
Yeah.
you are fucking crazy. There's
Oh
no
my
way in
God.
hell this happened in real life, but still, this is awesome.
Oh my goodness! And he saved everybody. He didn't just save the American troops. He saved everybody he could find, even the Japanese, even the enemy. And like, oh my goodness, I love I after the whole movie, after they go through beating him up, and he comes down the ridge, finally wounded after saving the 75. They just give him so much respect. I'm like, y'all are making me cry.
And you have that great shot where he's walking to the hospital, but it's a POV shot of everyone just looking at him with
Yeah,
shock and amazement. It was
yeah.
just so fantastic. It made me ignore the preachy symbolism that Mel Gibson throws in
Oh,
there,
there's some of that. Yeah.
where he's like baptized with the hospital water, or when he's being lowered down from the battlefield, the camera rises up like he's ascending to heaven,
Or
which
the beating you over the head with the Seventh Day Adventist religion.
oh, you remembered that. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
no, that was the one thing I'm like, stop.
But yeah,
I
like
get it. You don't like war. That's all we need to know.
all things considered, really above average war movie, especially the way
Oh
they
yeah.
make them today.
Well, my number five is one of John Wayne's last notable performances. This is, I think, his third to fourth last performances. 1960s, The Alamo. I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar with The Alamo.
I know about the event, and I know that there's another movie called The Alamo that for a while was the biggest box office bomb ever before
Yeah, that's the
Cutthroat Island.
2004 one. Ignore that movie. I'm talking about the 1960 Alamo. So I am a big fan of the Davy Crockett franchise. Disney made Davy Crockett movies back in the 50s and 60s, and Davy Crockett famously fought at the Battle of Alamo, which is basically defending it against Mexican troops where everyone was, well, murdered and died by the Mexican army. But
Yeah.
this is basically a giant cinematic battle of Davy Crockett and his buddy, as well as a couple other notable figures from history. If you watch a lot of older historical movies, basically defending the land. Whether they're right or wrong is up to them, because should they have been trying to take the Mexican land? Probably not. But it's basically the human drama going on between this war, and it's 96 men in a fort versus thousands of men out there as they're defending this crumbling tiny fort, and it's absolutely incredible. It's also devastating because everyone gets murdered. Um, this is a 3-hour film, and John Wayne plays Davy Crockett. I think it's my favorite portrayal of Davy Crockett, as much as I do love the Davy Crockett movies and the 4 to 5 seasons of TV shows they did in black and white back in the day. Those are cheesy as hell. Great TV, though. Grew up with it. But just these guys, and they give a lot of epic war speeches, as you would expect. And the general's sick, and it's very cliched and problematic. But at the end of the day, the performances by John Wayne, this is probably the latest, because he was known for his Stagecoach and his Rio Brave and all these other really early performances. But when it hit the
His
50s
Oscar
and
for True
60s,
Grit.
yep. But when he hit the 50s and 60s, there's very few performances people are saying, y'all gotta watch that. They're just sort of forgettable TV westerns, but this sort of resurrected John Wayne's career, and then he did True Grit after this. So technically, True Grit was one of his very last performances as well, because he died in like 67 or something. But he gives a phenomenal performance, and every last supporting character in this fort has backstory and character, and it's really quite a feat to make such a movie like this not seem cheesy when, they're on the wrong side. Because, America trying to conquer everything, that's how it went. So, yeah, but absolutely love The Alamo. Have you seen The Alamo, Tyler?
I have not. I'm not as brushed up on John Wayne stuff as you are. I have heard of the Disney Davy Crockett. I haven't
Very good
seen
stuff.
them.
Very cheap.
I did I watched like the Disney December nostalgia critic stuff where he does spoil it, because I mean it's about the Alamo, you would have to, and then when they get to the second movie, it's just like, well, it takes place after the Alamo, and the theme song at the beginning of the second movie flat out says how Davy Crockett is mainly the stuff of legend and how some of the stories are already unreliable, which if audience members were already questioning that back in the 40s and 50s, that is really saying something.
Well, it's Western pulp, really. I mean, the first David Crockett movie is his entire life, and based upon his autobiography and all that stuff. From the backwoods to the war with the Aboriginals there, the big war before after the Civil War there, during and all that stuff, and then ends at the Alamo. He ran for Congress and all that stuff, and it's basically his whole life and death. The second Davy Crockett movie is The River Pirates. It's really like two mini episodes of Davy Crockett where he fights river pirates in a cool race thing, and then like I don't know helps the natives do something. They're cheesy. They're probably a little bit out of dated, but it was the 50s and 60s, so whatever. I love it. What's your number 4, Tyler?
My number 4 is, in my opinion, the best movie about a war that never actually happened because it's a fantasy adventure war movie.
Oh, okay.
And because of that, Hayao Miyazaki can portray both sides of the debate as being equally right and wrong, often about the exact same subject matter, without ever having audience members to go, why are you defending him? Why are you promoting that? This side's right, not them. Like, the problems that you get with every modern war movie where you portray real life troops, and unless you're Clint Eastwood and you make a movie about the American side of the debate and another movie about the Japanese side, you're pretty much screwed. And even then, that didn't defend him from criticisms either way. But the best war movie about one that never happened, in my opinion, is Princess Mononoke.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, because when you suggested war movies and you said anything about a battle, I'm just like, oh, I can put Princess Mononoke up there.
Yeah, I was expecting someone to put Star Wars on this list if we, had other guests, but
yeah, and there were so many war movies on. There are so many war movies from Studio Ghibli, especially about ones that never happened, and even a couple that did, because like Grave of the Fireflies and When Rises are both World War II stories. And weirdly enough, one of them is from Isao Takahata and the other one's from Miyazaki. But with Mononoke, I just love the fact that our lead character, Prince Ashitaka, who in my opinion is one of the best Ghibli heroes ever based on how committed he is to his pacifist nature, I love the fact that he does spend equal sides observing and reacting to both battlefields. Because with the human villagers led by Lady Eboshi, who is played very well by Minnie Driver, even though she's technically the villain of the movie, she's still an upstanding person. Like, she takes women who used to work in brothels, gives them meaningful jobs, pays them incredibly well, and gives them the opportunity to start families of their own. Hell, even when their husbands get killed by the forest gods, gives them a rifle and says, here, you can avenge your husband's death now. And I just sat there, I'm like, I should hate you, but you're actually all right.
Whatever happened to Minnie Driver? Like, she did, like, Goodwill Hunting and this, and I don't know. What did she do?
That's a good question. Like, during my Disney binge...
this up while you keep talking. I gotta figure out.
During my Disney binge, I found out that Minnie Driver was Jane in Tarzan, and I'm like, what? I thought that was Emma Thompson. Because that just sounds more right. But in any case, the human villagers, even though they're the villains, still have very identifiable motivations. And as for the forest gods, it's really easy to like them over the humans just because they're animals. The only reason they live in these woods is in order to survive. But at the same time, their methods of defending the woods is incredibly violent, brutal, and merciless. And you really get that feeling from the main wolf god, who was also played very well by Gillian Anderson. Her performance has nothing but contempt towards anyone who disagrees with her in the slightest, except for her human daughter, Princess Mononoke herself, played by Claire Danes, who at first is incredibly apprehensive towards anyone who's human. But when she does meet Ashitaka during that really awesome battle where he defends both Eboshi and San from killing each other, does that whole "this is what hatred looks like" speech that's usually in the climax of a war movie, but here it's not even halfway through, because Miyazaki already knows that these characters would not listen to something like that in real life, which is really pathetic and goes to show how everyone who praises this movie for its pacifism might not actually believe that in real life, which is just even more embarrassing, but that's another subject in and of itself. As expected with a Studio Ghibli movie, the animation is absolutely breathtaking. There are a lot of beautiful, vibrant colors, features some of Ghibli's most badass action sequences, to the point where every time I see a Princess Mononoke DVD or Blu-ray in the kids section at Walmart, I just sit there and I go, oh yeah, Prince Ashitaka, who whenever he's affected by his demon curse turns violent and beheads and amputates people with a freaking bow and arrow.
Let's just be glad that we get something in the Walmart, kids Walmart section that doesn't suck.
There are a few other ones, but I don't have time to list all of them. And one thing that I really appreciated upon rewatch is that looking at the massive scope that Miyazaki puts on his canvas, it reminded me so much of the scenes I have seen of Lawrence of Arabia, where the shots are absolutely massive. They feature the locations, they feature the characters who are the size of ants. It really does feel like a war movie, even when the battle hasn't even been established. The one thing I will say though is that I'm not really sure why Princess Mononoke is the title character, other than her name sounds badass and she looks badass. Her arc revolving around her being half human, half wolf, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense why she considers herself a wolf, because she walks like a human, she fights like a human, she rides animals like a human. It's not like Tarzan, where he's at least stunned and shocked by the similarities he has towards other humans and such. And it just felt like a huge missed opportunity. I didn't buy the romantic chemistry between her and Ashitaka. I did buy the on and off philosophical agreements and disagreements. That part really held it together. And Claire Danes is one of the few actors who can take such a loud, high pitched, over the top character and still make them seem incredibly natural. It's one of the reasons Claire Danes is one of my favorite actors. But yeah, Princess Mononoke just has huge spectacle, awesome action sequences, incredibly well fleshed out characters who are incredibly consistent with their beliefs. And altogether, I don't really consider it Miyazaki's best movie. That would be Howl's Moving Castle for me, but I think it's his most mature and complex.
I actually really love this movie. Howl's and Princess Mononoke are like my two favorite Ghibli movies. I've never been.
They're my favorite
Ponyo.
Miyazaki movies. They're not my favorite Ghibli ones. You already know what my favorite Ghibli
Yeah,
one.
yeah, I know. I mean, I've never been a fan of Ponyo or like that sort of thing. They irritate me, but I really like Princess Mononoke. It makes me want to watch it again. I have to go grab the Blu-ray I got over there.
I do like Ponyo, but trust me, it makes total sense why anyone would.
It grates on my nerves. That theme song alone is worth a punch in the face.
I've only heard the theme song once or twice, so I don't
Fuck that
actually know
song.
the words.
I like Liam Neeson as the underwater god, though. I do appreciate that. Coming in at my number 4, I have my favorite submarine movie in the history of submarine movies. There are a lot of submarine movies in this world, but I really like Clark Gable's 1959 Run Silent, Run Deep. This is Clark Gable playing a disgraced submarine captain who lost his ship and was the only survivor of it, being given a new command of a submarine when in the Japanese waters during World War II. I had to check my notes there. The mystery ghost submarine that killed his crew many, many years ago comes back and starts taking out submarines simply on patrol. Now, this movie is, yes, it's old. I will give it that. But this
That's
movie is one of the most interesting but cliched looks at the way we sort of look at submarine films. Because it gives you, because a lot of submarine films give you the person who's not capable to do it and they can do it, but it gives you a much older Clark Gable. This is 1958. Keep in mind, his heyday was 1939, Gone with the Wind, and 1941, The Misfits, with Marilyn Monroe. So we're looking at many, many, many years later. So it's a very, very old Clark Gable. And he comes on, everyone's very, very reluctant. Burt Lancaster is also leading this film, who was a really big deal back in the 50s and 60s. And we get a supporting cast that doesn't want to go behind their captain, that wants to mutiny. Like the first half of the movie is, how can we mutiny this guy who's going to get us killed? He's drilling us hard. He's making us turn really, really fast. He's making us load submarine shells. He's cutting rations. He's making our sleep hell. Like, he's doing all of this. And as soon as they get to that submarine strait, as soon as they get there, guess what all that training did? Boom. They're able to take out that enemy submarine, but not after many, many tries and maneuvers and such. And they finally realize what this guy's been putting them through hell for. And, I mean, the way they construct this movie is so well and smartly done. Because how is the enemy tracking them? By their garbage and the way the wind drifts. They put their garbage out, and the way the wind and the water floats the garbage, they know where to follow them. That's how smart this submarine is. And now they have to live with the garbage, and just the way they do that, and the distance of the pings, and the way and it's a really, really intelligent, smart movie. It's not just like, if Michael Bay got a hold of this movie, this would be crap. But the way this movie is constructed and directed by Robert Wise is absolutely incredible. He also directed West Side Story, Sound of Music, and the first Star Trek movie. There's just
That's
a
right.
level of competence behind this film that you don't really see in submarine movies. And the ending's a little abrupt, but for me, this is one of those movies. Vision TV was on cable when we had it. They played old people shows, Murder She Wrote, and I don't know, upstairs, downstairs. But every night at midnight, they'd play some really old freaking movie, and they'd play it every night for a month. I watched this movie 30 times in a row because I liked it that much. I'm like, oh, it's midnight, Run Silent, Run Deep is on. Let me go get that. And now they got a Criterion, and I'm like, oh man, I gotta get that. I freaking love this movie. As much as I like, I really like Hunter Killer with Gerard Butler, or U-571, or Hunt for Red October. I really do love a good submarine movie. This is the pinnacle of submarine war movies for me. So this is 1944, I believe it takes place. Have you seen this movie, Tyler?
I have not, but when you said best submarine movie and Das Boot was on your honorable mentions, I thought for sure it would be Hunt for Red October, considering your taste. But that's a really interesting pick. And when you said Robert Wise, you already sold me on that because he is such a really good director. You're right about West Side Story and Sound of Music, but it's also not his first war movie. He also had, well, it was his first movie. It wouldn't be his last because he ended up making The Sand Pebbles afterwards, which
oh my goodness, The Sand Pebbles! I forgot that movie. That's phenomenal.
Which also for any Avatar,
I love
which
that
also
movie.
for any Avatar: The Last Airbender fans out there, Uncle Iroh got an Oscar nomination for The Sand Pebbles back in 1960. So he was already working in Hollywood, and he was already that good of an actor. And then Mako would later go on to do stuff like Conan the Barbarian, Pearl Harbor, and of course Avatar: The Last Airbender, and he would become the favorite uncle that nobody ever had.
Conan the Barbarian is great. I love that movie. Oh my goodness, that's a war movie too. Oh, I haven't watched The Sand Pebbles in years, man. I gotta go watch that. Do I own it? No, I gotta get me a copy. Amazon, help me out. All right, what you got at number 3?
Okay, number 3 is going to seem like a little bit of a cheat because technically the Vietnam War aspect only takes place for about 10 to 15 minutes, if I had to guess.
I'll allow it.
And that's just including like actually being in Vietnam, because there are some sequences of basic training that are portrayed a little more lighthearted and kind of skimp over the tough love shit that we're already used to with a movie like this. But in my opinion, the consequences of war towards those who get out of it alive are still pivotal to the story. And that movie would be Forrest Gump.
Oh, okay.
I know.
I'll allow it. You go ahead. You know I'm not a fan, but I understand people love it, so go.
No, well, trust me, it makes total sense why you wouldn't find it a fan. But I mean, for me, the Vietnam sequence was where Forrest learns the toughest parts of life very early on and then spends the rest of the movie trying to compensate for that. Because after months of very basic missions where absolutely nothing happens, Lieutenant Dan wants them to change their socks every stop, even though it's been raining for 4 months. So they're already going to probably either die of gout at some point sooner or later. But yeah, during the ambush scene where finally something happens and he gets out of it alive, but realizes that his new best friend, Bubba, who he made a serious business commitment to once they got the hell out, was nowhere to be seen. And he's just like, well, he's my best friend. I have to make sure that he's okay in some aspects. And he does rescue 4 people alive, including his superior, Lieutenant Dan. But even though he gets the Medal of Honor for going back into enemy lines for no real reason other than to save as many people as he possibly can, it's still a very bittersweet victory because Bubba does die. And even though he gets him out of the battlefield before the Air Force blows it to smithereens, because I mean, it'd be honorable enough just to make sure that his body gets sent home to be buried. So that decision still makes sense in some capacity. But for me, that was the scene where Forrest realized that he can't save everyone no matter how hard he tries. But it's the fact that he tries to begin with that makes a huge difference towards somebody in the end, which only makes him try harder to make as many people happy throughout the rest of the movie as possible, including Lieutenant Dan, who is incredibly ungrateful about being saved because not only has he lost both of his legs due to bullet wounds, he was incredibly ungrateful to be pulled out of there to begin with because he has that strict family tradition where every man in the family fought and died during every single American war. And something that I noticed rewatching it when it's on AMC because it's the new AMC movie that they play every day now. Yeah, pretend to be surprised by that. I know.
AMC plays a lot of movies over and over again.
But what I really love about Lieutenant Dan at the beginning is that even though he is technically suicidal in that aspect, he's not blindly suicidal. He's not going to lead his troops into danger unless it actually serves the platoon and serves his country. And to the point where he'll actually sacrifice himself during the ambush in order to get his troops out as far away from the field as possible. So already, once he loses his legs and becomes incredibly cynical and depressed, there's already a subtle hint that he can reform his ways and make peace with his situation, which he does when he approaches Forrest with the opportunity of going into the shrimping business for no other reason other than he has nowhere else to go and he has no one else in his life other than Forrest, albeit very reluctantly, but he's rewarded for his patience, not just profiting off of the shrimp business, but also acknowledging himself the very same lesson that Forrest has learned. They can't control every aspect of their life, but they can know for sure which ones they can and which ones they can't without having trying every single one of them. So it is a very oddball choice, but I do think the Vietnam War does play a pivotal part in the story, in the character development in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, no, this is definitely the one part of the movie I actually appreciate because I do like a good war sequence. I just wish that on Remembrance Day in Canada, we'd put more, instead of just World War One and World War Two, we'd appreciate the Gulf War, the Vietnam War. Even though people who went and fought there are Canadians who fought in the Vietnam War, and
were there though? Because
yeah, they had to disown it, but they went and fought and came back, and they still deserve our respect. We can't just say, oh, look, the great wars, the ones that are clearly right and wrong. We got to respect all soldiers, and I think that's what a lot of Vietnam movies try to do, and I appreciate the aspects they try to do of this because whether the war was wrong or right doesn't matter. Most of the time, wars are wrong.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we have to respect those who do go and fight because they put their lives on the line for whatever that is in some regard. And Born on the 4th of July, excellent, really interesting look at the Vietnam War if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, as you were describing that exact thing about Vietnam, it just made me realize I'm actually going to do a halfway switch where what was my number two is now a number two that I hadn't even thought of up until now, but I can completely sum up why I love that movie off the top of my head. For those who were wondering, my number two originally was going to be, for future reference, Grave of the Fireflies, just because of how fucking miserable it is.
That is a miserable film, yeah.
But it has a lot going against it because, for one, you're never going to watch it again afterwards. And two, Isao Takahata describes it not really a pro-war movie or anti-war movie because if it were to take place during a tornado or a tsunami, the story would be the exact same. It's really just a survival movie that happens.
Spoil your number two there.
I'm not going to. Not going to. I'm just flat out saying for anyone who is still watching the video and is slightly curious.
We get pretty good. People watch all the way through. We usually have about 10, 15 people to watch all the way through, so.
Yeah. I know.
We got fact that core audience members there. Shout out to our core audience members there. I don't like the movie The Core, but I like you.
But yeah,
my number three here. I'm going with Stanley Kubrick's greatest film in cinema achievement history. I'm sorry, I don't care what y'all think about anything that he's done. His other stuff is great. I don't care for 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I think The Shining's fine. It's all about Spartacus for me. This is the first movie I saw by Kubrick as a child. I was about 8 years old and this was on TV. It was 3 hours. They played this directly after the Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur on Christmas, and I said, what is this? I absolutely love this. For those of you who don't know what Spartacus is Kirk Douglas, basically him as a slave becoming a gladiator and waging war against the Roman Empire in a long time ago. I'm not going to pretend to get the time right.
Sometime BC, that's all I know.
Sometime BC. But Spartacus is a masterfully shot, long epic, up there with worthy of Lawrence of Arabia, Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, Das Boot, in these style of epic films. We get to see Kirk Douglas give maybe the second greatest acting performance of his career. As much as I wanted to put the Vikings in the number 3 spot with Orson Welles, Orson Welles does not give a shit. He's just sort of there, and it's a really great movie, but he does not care. But this movie is basically Kirk Douglas carrying the whole film as the supporting cast does their very, very best. But this is a Kirk Douglas show, and I like that man. That man is cool in Planet of the Apes. He's cool in the Vikings, and he's excellent in this movie. This scene is sort of like the original. It's better than 300 Spartans. Don't go watch 300 Spartans. That's a piece of crap. Okay, that's a bad movie. But we get to see these gladiator sequences, and we get to see him fall in love, and it's pretty much the better Gladiator movie. If you've seen Gladiator, watch 300 Spartans. The only thing that Gladiator has going for it more than this movie is because it literally rips the whole thing off completely. If I don't know if you've seen it, Tyler.
I have seen parts of Gladiator, and the only thing I really remember is Joaquin Phoenix being the original Joffrey going.
Yes, and that's what makes that movie great. But basically, it's a bunch of guys who had families, they're doing their thing. He falls in love with a new girl, and they break out all these gladiators from Rome. Sound familiar? After traveling around and winning their freedom, sound familiar? To take down the Roman Empire in a war sequence. But what sets this movie apart, and I'm sure y'all have heard this, is one of the, I think, greatest cinematic moments of the first 50 years of Hollywood in its entirety. We get to see the army defeated and routed up, and who's ever left after they fought is there, and they say, "Who is Spartacus?" And because everyone believes, and you've seen this moment, I think, right? Yes?
Oh, I'm going to quote it along with you right now.
And because everyone believes fully in their leader, they say, "I am Spartacus. I'm
Spartacus.
I'm
Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus. The remainder of the army all stands up and says, Spartacus is not a person. It's not Kirk Douglas. It's the idea of freedom. And it's such an impactful moment. And then the bad guy, and as the movie folds and we see every last slave crucified for trying to fight for their freedom and be who they want to be, whatever that may be, and have families and such, we get to see his wife and kid drive down this road full of crosses and dying soldiers. And she just looks at the kid and she's like, "That is freedom." And looks up at the dying father. That is a powerful moment. That is a movie. I am crying, but I am not ashamed because this is a powerful film. I love Spartacus. Great flick.
Yeah, you know what? I've only seen parts of Spartacus myself. I learned more about it through the Stanley Kubrick documentary Life in Pictures, where they showed some clips of Kirk Douglas giving speeches, obviously, Laurence Olivier and Peter Ustinov in particular, because Peter Ustinov, from what I understand, was really fantastic and even got an Oscar out of it. Yeah. But which is interesting because I only know Peter Ustinov from the Disney Robin Hood one where he's Prince John, and he was so funny in such a funny way.
You know, I love that movie.
Yeah, and when I saw him in Spartacus and realized that was him, I'm like, oh my God, you were playing the same Weasley scumbag and everything, didn't you? But was still really good in it. But I learned how much could have went wrong with Spartacus because, for one, it was written by Dalton Trumbo at Kirk Douglas's request, even though Trumbo had been blacklisted for being an outspoken communist. Yep. Everyone knew about it because, for whatever reason, even back then, gossip in Hollywood just was out in the open, and Douglas just plowed right through it because he knew he would be rewarded for it. And on that level, I respect Kirk Douglas as a producer on that end. What I don't really respect on that end was the way he really had more control over it than Kubrick actually did, because this was the movie where Kubrick was just like, from now on, I need to have final cut, because Douglas made them change a lot of things in the script. There were certain aspects about the casting and the direction that they kept disagreeing with each other on. And the only reason Kubrick directed Spartacus was because after Douglas had worked with him on Paths of Glory, Kirk Douglas was already working on Spartacus, didn't like the director, tossed him, and went to Kubrick's business partner at the time, James Harrison. It's just like, hey, can I borrow Stanley for this? And because Kubrick and Harris had a production company, they were just starting out. They're just like, it wouldn't be a bad business idea in order to get involved. And then once it became strictly a business endeavor, that's when Kubrick is just like, from now on, I want to have complete control. So it's not just business, it's incredibly personal as well. So there is a lot going against it, but still, there are so many movies where directors and actors quarrel over each other. Bill Murray hated being on Groundhog Day because to him, it wasn't because to him it wasn't philosophical enough, but it was for everybody else apparently.
Yeah, I really like this movie. I know a lot of people. I know there's a lot of fans of The Shining out there, but those aren't people who love The Shining. As those aren't Kubrick fans; those are Stephen King fans. And then like Kubrick fans really like 2001: Space Odyssey, but I'm not into sci-fi. Straight up, I'm sure it's great. Whatever. And I don't
There are
like
parts that
Lolita
drag. Don't
because I
get me
don't
wrong.
like what they did with Peter Sellers because that I don't know. I like that guy. I don't like him being that scumbag.
Which
Um,
one?
Lolita. It's a Kubrick film.
I haven't seen Lolita.
Kubrick plays like this teacher who's inappropriately involved with a student, and I just don't like Sellers doing that. I just don't like Peter Sellers doing that. I mean,
I have
and
yet
then
to
like
see it,
Paths of
so
Glory, just,
I'm not
I
gonna
didn't get
comment
it.
on that.
It's got moments. This for me is like the quintessential like Kubrick film because it's got his early fingerprints, but then you can also see that he's going to go on to do things people like apparently more than I do, and that's okay. What's
Yeah,
coming in
there's
for a
that.
surprise number two here that you changed instead of Grave of the Fireflies?
Well, as you were describing how even though the war is bad, it's still important to honor the soldiers who were
Mhm.
involved. My favorite war movies are anti-combat but pro-soldier because they at
Mhm.
least acknowledge that there was a certain level of sacrifice, whether or not they voluntarily enlisted or were drafted against their will. And it reminded me of a 2017 movie that I saw on my laptop because there was really nowhere else for me to watch the movie. And even though it was 2 hours long of me just staring at a very small device, even though essentially the movie is Bryan Cranston and Lawrence Fishburne angrily disagreeing with each other on everything while Steve Carell is sitting in the middle, silent,
Oh,
deadpan, and is about
oh,
ready to cry his eyes out at the situation they're
it's the
going on
flag
over the
flying
course of
one
this
or
road
whatever.
trip. It is Last Flag Flying, a Richard Linklater movie that not enough people know about, let alone have seen, because I honestly think it's one of Linklater's best. It covers a lot of ground that he's not used to covering. Usually he's just covering average everyday people in Texas or in Paris in regards to the Before trilogy, where it's really just people standing around and discussing philosophy about regular everyday life, religions, and such. But this is strictly a philosophical battle, not just about whether or not the war they fought was a good deed, whether or not the sins they committed in their past, where they were smuggling opioids to either deal on the black market or deal with their own pain, something that Steve Carell's character took the fall for. But it's also a philosophical debate over whether they've really done anything meaningful in their lives. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's just my wife. I muted it. Don't worry.
No, that's totally fine. But
I
you
gotta
really
mute
get
off
to
the phone.
examine what each of these guys went through decades after they served. I think it was either in World War II or Vietnam. I'm willing to bet it was Vietnam
I think
because
it
it
was
takes
Vietnam because
place.
American Made with Tom Cruise did something similar in its conception of smuggling drugs, but not as good.
But yeah, like it also takes place like during the time they captured Saddam Hussein, which I think was like in '03 or '06, somewhere
Yeah, they found
along
him in a
those
hole or
lines.
something, right?
Yeah, and like it's
No.
in the news just to let us know that it's not technically taking place in the present day, but it still feels like it. It's really you really get to examine what these guys have done in their lives for the arguments that they had. Where Bryan Cranston is the most high functioning alcoholic you can possibly think of, where he's not blackout drunk, but is still incredibly reckless and impulsive, but he still has a decent amount of things going for it. Even though he's a bar owner, he's technically a successful businessman, and as he puts it, there's not really too much to it when he offers to let Carell in on it. You got Lawrence Fishburne, who is supposedly the one who is the most straight laced out of the group, even though he used to be a dirty cursor, gambler, liar, and a drunk. But he's the most soft spoken preacher you can come up with who hates to curse at anyone except Bryan Cranston because he really is just that big of an idiot. And it also, in my opinion, is one of Steve Carell's best dramatic performances because there's so much that he doesn't do. As I said before, he mainly sits in the middle, just looking like he's about ready to scream in frustration because the road trip is about him burying his son who had been killed in Iraq. And we get that great scene where we don't see the coffin, but we see him looking into it and realizing that his son has no face left and that it's just unbearable to sit through, even though we're not the ones actually experiencing it. which just makes the road trip feel so much more impactful, not just for him, but for his friends, because even though they technically haven't suffered the exact same circumstances, they know exactly what he's going through, especially when they all go to this one fellow comrade's widow or parent or whatever, who they completely screwed over because it was his opioids that they stole. And they just sat there and it's like, we came here to confess. Why aren't we? And the great thing about the movie is that it doesn't leave any solid answers, even though the soldier that is going with these three to bury the son is trying to come up with a way to have him buried in a military outfit because it would be supposedly undignified if he didn't. He still sympathizes with the fact that the father does want his son buried in a graduation suit because that was the last time he remembered him truly being happy. There are so many different philosophical disagreements that are each examined with as much care and consideration. And the great thing about every other war movie is, as I said before, there really are no clear-cut answers. And on top of that, it's just funny. Bryan Cranston and Lawrence Fishburne have excellent comedic chemistry with each other, and it definitely helps that, like with most Linklater movies, he tends to shoot the conversations very simplistically, a lot of long takes where you see all the actors in the exact same frame, which make their actions and reactions within the exact same shot feel all the more hilarious or dramatic whenever things take a sudden turn. And of course, the naturalistic dialogue that doesn't feature a lot of catchphrases and insults that you're used to seeing with most movies like this.
Yeah, I have yet to check this out. This is an Amazon thing, so I can watch it. So I probably will because
I implore you to do so. It was one of those movies that during my 2017 best of list, I felt so disappointed not putting it on there. And the only reason I didn't was that whole technicality bullshit where it gets released in some theaters the year before and then bigger in the year after. I, for whatever reason, fell under that stupid rule, even though after this year, I'm not doing that based on how many movies I've seen that other audiences haven't.
Yeah, so my number two is going to be one that I've watched several times, and it's really hard to get through, but I think it's one of the most impactful tank movie I've ever watched. What year did this thing come out? 2014's David Ayer's Fury with Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, Logan Lerman, and Michael Pena. Have you seen this film, Tyler?
Again, I've only seen glimpses of it because I didn't, other than Brad Pitt and Logan Lerman and Shia LaBeouf, I didn't really think it had that much going for it. I thought the only thing unique, I thought the only unique thing about it was that it was about a tank and that there was some semi-autobiographical stuff because David Ayer was in the military and has a huge amount of respect for them.
Well, what this movie has going for it is it follows basically this group of people who run and live in a tank, and they go from point to point, bouncing around in World War II. But this is, I think, David Ayer's best script that he has actually ever written. Within the first 25 minutes of the film, excuse me.
How's that feel?
There we go. Within the first 25 minutes of the film, we get one of the most intense scenes where Shia LaBeouf is being bullied to do a certain position, and he's getting beat up, like verbally beat up by these guys and such, and he's like, I don't want to be here and all this stuff. He's like, you think we want to be here? We're living in a tank and such. And immediately that hooked me because that scene is not very long, but it just roped me right into this. Probably his... Now, David Ayer does not have the best track record. I will be the first to say that.
No.
But this movie is his absolutely finest movie. And the one thing it does really, really well is it gets amazing performance out of Brad Pitt, which is not hard to do because Brad Pitt's a great actor. It does these really great war sequences without really going to shaky cam and having some, as you say, learning what a tripod is. But Shia LaBeouf is incredible in this movie. His performance is... I think he should have got Best Supporting Actor for this movie, honestly.
Really?
It's incredible. His performance of, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do that, to, I'm going to do this, but I'm reluctant, to this sort of like, the way the audience feels at the end, sort of like, we've watched this man transform from having to don't wanting to do it, to killing people, to literally being completely and utterly broken. And it's this brilliant performance layered in subtleties. And I know Shia LaBeouf isn't hot right now. I don't know what's going on. But this in 2014, man, he was on fire with this film. Yeah, I don't want to spoil much because it is a heavily plot driven film. The characters obviously drive the plot, but just some of the deaths and some of the characters just really hit you emotionally. And man, this movie's heavy. It's really
Oh,
great though. It's really really good, but it's a heavy movie. Um,
I
yeah.
didn't realize it was. I didn't realize it was that heavy. Like I
Me-
knew some of the actors that are in this. I know now just because of how far they've gotten. Like I know John Bernthal and Michael Pena are a couple of the other members of the Tank. At least I
mhm.
think they are.
Yeah, I know Michael Pena because of Kick Ass. So,
That's John Leguizamo.
oh, that's John. Oh, never mind. Well, then, is he in Dora the Explorer movie? Who's in the Dora
I
the
get the
Explorer movie?
comparison.
Who's in the Dora the Explorer movie? That's what I need to know.
Well, John Leguizamo did adore the Explorer movie, not the one that you sent me the digital copy for.
It's such a great movie.
Hey, dude, it's not that I don't trust you, because a lot of people I trust said it was a genuine surprise. I just haven't gotten to it. That's all.
Oh, it is Michael Pena. But anyway, this movie is an
Oh,
emotional,
right.
like, rip your heart out movie. But it's with a tank, and it's a very simple story, and it's just so well done. I highly recommend you watch the whole thing. Maybe they'll start playing on AMC all next week.
It wouldn't surprise me. How was Logan Lerman? Because a lot of people thought that was a genuine surprise after
It's a really good performance. I mean,
knowing
I
him
saw
as the
Ender's Game and
Percy
didn't care.
Jackson. Yeah, like knowing him as the Percy Jackson or Three Musketeers guy, because he's the guy in Three Musketeers who's French but with the most American accent
Oh,
ever.
was that the really bad Three Musketeers one?
Yeah,
Oh my goodness! But no,
it's not the Disney one that's actually fun.
there's the '90s Disney one that I really like. That's quirky and whatever. And then there's the Man in the Iron Mask, which is a fun take on it with DiCaprio there. I
I
didn't
didn't
mind
realize that
that.
was a take on it.
Yeah, no, Logan Lerman's really, really great in this. There's no bad performances. Everyone has strong characters, and when one of them dies, you really, really feel for it because the other guys feel it. You feel it. This is a heavy movie, man. It's heavy.
I can imagine that because it like takes place in a tank, it's a little
Hmm.
more claustrophobic and there's more of a reliance for the platoon to get to know each other. That's one thing I don't really like about war movies is that the platoon's backstories are either summed up with the group sitting around in a campfire or in Apocalypse Now's case where Martin Sheen just narrates everyone's explanations and it's just like, well, gee, that
There
really
is
took the
no
fun out of
narration.
it.
It's simply conversations and combat in this tank. That's the movie.
That is what I like to hear.
It's so well done. Honestly, David Ayer has never done anything to even come close to this. Because he did, yeah.
Don't a lot of
No,
people like End of Watch though?
it's fine. End of Watch is okay. I watched it
Or
on
is it the
TV once.
found footage thing that like butchers it?
It's okay. I watched half of it on TV, like I said. So
Okay.
it
Well,
won't
I
really do
mean,
much
you
for
don't
me,
have to
but
tell you don't have to tell me that the guy who made Bright doesn't have a great track record.
yeah, but no, seriously, Fury is super underrated in the war genre. It's literally higher than The Great Escape. Okay, that's how much I hold this in regard. It's higher than The Great Escape or Bridge on the River Kwai, one of these. That's how high I hold this movie. So
Okay, that would explain why you didn't spoil that
yeah,
much.
I really don't want to tell you anything. I want you to go watch this movie because I want you to feel the emotional impact of knowing nothing and just seeing it's a tank movie, a bunch of guys getting together and doing tank things.
Yeah, and my number one pick is a movie that I've seen a bunch of times, but like I there are so many great things about the movie that I can't pinpoint down because I'm
Hmm.
just so immersed in the experience. It's the movie that I took the hardest amount of time to come up with notes that I'm pretty sure I'm not even going to completely abide by with what I'm about to say next. But no matter how many times Saving Private Ryan was on
Hmm.
AMC, I no matter how far into the movie it is, because it's 2 hours and 49 minutes, it's no wonder that AMC puts it on. They can fill like half a day with it.
Yeah,
I
that's
my family and
not that
I will
impressive.
sit down and watch it. We will like laugh, get intense, and cry at the exact same moments, no matter how many times I've seen it. It features probably the grittiest and most realistic direction Steven Spielberg has ever done in his entire career. Because looking at it from a visual style, even though it has a lot of his same directing techniques, it still feels very fresh and new given the circumstances and the way that he utilizes the camera work. Janis Kaminski's cinematography, even though I made fun of it the way Mel Gibson uses a tripod, I still think the shaky cam in this movie works to great effect, especially during the opening and final battle sequences. Because everybody, even if they don't like the movie, they love the Omaha Beach sequence that
That is
is
such a
like
great sequence, and I hate
20 to 25 minutes of pure absolute carnage. And the shaky camera work really puts you into the mindset that these soldiers are in because they have absolutely no idea where to go. Right from the get-go, everyone is being slaughtered left to right. Even when they jump off the side of the boats, they still get shot. The sound mixing is absolutely awesome because again, it puts you into the mindset. Whenever the soldiers duck under the water and back up, the sound changes along with it, and it feels incredibly ominous. The portrayal of shell shock through Captain Miller's perspective, where everything is slowed down and the sound design is completely drained as if he had been deafened by a grenade. And seeing all this carnage of people walking around on fire or picking up their own limbs in such a deadpan and nonchalant way just really goes to show how tragically desensitized everyone is. I usually look at being desensitized to tragic stuff in a positive way because it's one less thing to be upset and concerned about. But here it's just absolutely terrifying, especially when Tom Hanks picks up his helmet that has blood and water in it and puts it back on him because he knows for a fact that no matter what happens, danger is all over the place. And it's never until his platoon ever makes progress during the missions in this movie that the camera ever stabilizes because it means they're making progress. The battle sequences are absolutely insane. The amount of realism where characters are holding their own guts as they're lying down has led so many war veterans to consider this the most authentic portrayal of combat that they have ever seen. Not every veteran, obviously, because some veterans consider this one of the best war movies. Some of them consider it one of the worst. And in any case, it does kind of make sense.
Yeah,
it's a movie. Like, not every...
Yeah.
It's a war movie. Not everyone's going to be thrilled by it.
There's one thing I don't believe about the film. Like, I don't mind that they go on a journey. I don't believe they'd abandon all orders to go save another brother. Like, that'd be disobeying orders. You know, like, why are they running off to save one person when there's a whole war to fight, you know? Like...
Well, they're given orders to go look for Private Ryan.
Yeah, but who would give those orders? That's ridiculous.
Here's the thing. It's actually based on a real-life principle because Private Ryan is in a family of 4 sons, and because 3 of those sons were killed in combat, one of them during the Omaha Beach, because once things get stabilized, we get a wide shot of a dead body. We zoom in on it, and it says, what's his name, Ryan? And then it's just like, well, in American military, there's this thing called the sole survivor policy, where if there's more than one family member in the battlefield and one of them dies and there's one left, they have to be sent back home in order to be like an heir to the family so that there would be like a continued legacy or something like that. They call it the sole survivor policy. I'm not saying it makes sense, but like this was a real thing that happened.
That throws me off for the movie. Like, I like them going on the journey. I just don't think it makes any sense. I think, you know, if they found him, they'd send him home, but they're not going to go purposely looking for him, you know?
Yeah, and I get that, but still, it's hard to explain. The rules don't make sense, but they are real life rules, and that's just another thing that adds to the insanity and the realism of just how little this war actually made sense. And again, like I keep saying this over and over again, I love movies that are anti-destruction but are pro-human, and I think that's like the big prevalent theme throughout this film. It's one of the first war movies where I really saw that happen. Like that one scene where Vin Diesel is trying to defy Tom Hanks's orders by rescuing this little girl that the French citizens are trying to hand off, and he gets killed as a result for an act of kindness. And Tom Hanks just bluntly goes, "That's why we don't stop. That's why we don't pick up civilians." It's really tough. And Tom Hanks, this has got to be one of, if not the darkest performances that he's ever given. Maybe,
fair enough.
Maybe Road to Perdition is a little bit more dark. I'm not entirely sure. What's that?
Philadelphia, maybe?
Depressing, maybe. I don't know about dark because even though he does have the typical Tom Hanks persona where he's patient and compassionate, but still does it in a very blunt way, he has to be a lot more ruthless in his characterization.
That's true.
Like when they find that one German soldier who ends up killing him at the very end of the movie, and they let him go because he's a POW, he'll just make things even more complicated in their mission. It's it has that tricky. There are no solid answers
No.
in case that wasn't already clear. Because yeah, it was a good thing to let someone go who had voluntarily surrendered and was clearly going through the same PTSD that they were going through. And then he ends up killing Captain Miller for no real reason other than if he doesn't do it, he'll get killed by his own people. And meanwhile, you have that great sequence of Corporal Upham, played by Jeremy Davies, the one guy who's wearing the bullets around him and
Mm-hmm.
is just so shell shocked that he can barely function. He can barely move. He's doing nothing but sobbing an amount of anguish and destruction that's going on. And then he snaps out of it to kill that one soldier that he had encouraged to let go, just as a sign as if he's not giving up his principles that innocent people need to be spared. He just knows who's innocent and who doesn't after he lets those other soldiers go because he can see that they're not really into it. They're following orders. He's seen his own troops, including Private Ryan, who everyone forgets is Matt Damon. I keep forgetting it's
Yep.
Matt Damon.
It
And
is
he's
Matt
still
Damon.
incredibly good in it, even though he's only in it for maybe 20 minutes of the 2 hour and 49-minute runtime.
Really just the end sequence there.
Yeah. And I love how, even though he can swallow in the grief of all three of his brothers dying, he knows that they died for a valid reason to protect and serve at all costs. And he's not going to throw that away just because the government wants this one random family to have a continued legacy. Like, to him, that doesn't make sense. And it does serve into what you were saying of how those rules really don't add up.
Yeah.
And
I
they
mean,
do go into
I
the.
like the movie to a certain percentage. I like the beach sequence. But
Oh,
I
yeah,
just,
yeah.
the
Like, I
movie
hear
just,
you.
logically, my brain can't figure it out. Even with the information of that clause, I'm just like, well, if he was close by, maybe, but like, I don't know. But
Although
regardless,
stupid.
very well directed. That leads me into my number one, which is also a Steven Spielberg film, Schindler's List.
Right. Yeah.
I really like this movie. It's based on a true story, as many of you will know. You probably watched it once in history class to understand World War II. But I think for me, this is Steven Spielberg's greatest achievement in filmmaking, because this film it's dark, it's emotional, it shows the horrors of war, it shows the Germans from the good and bad perspective. Very little good, I might add, very little good. And he does it in black and white. This is one of the only films I think he does in black and white. He might have done maybe like an early short in black and white, but I doubt it. Um, and it really is a master class in filmmaking. The way the characters speak, the right amount of speeches, the way the characters react, down to the tiniest soldier or the reaction shot. This one has some of the best reaction shots, particularly when the girl's breaking out of the camp and Oscar Schindler is watching this girl get beat by a German soldier. It's You only see it in the hindsight, but you see his face, and that's the most important reaction. This is it's a very important movie, obviously, but I do think it's the greatest war film because it tackles the large battles in a certain percentage, and then it also tackles the aftermath of war and the internment camps and the way the people were deplorably treated. But it also tells the story in such a way that I think a survivor of the film would sit down and watch this and say, you know what? I'm okay with this. Because if you said you're going to make a film about World War II prison camps and you show it to the family, they're not going to be all right with that. Like, that's not how it goes. You have to really have a special touch and director. This movie has I think, the perfect runtime, the perfect pacing. Ben Kingsley practically disappears into his role as the accountant, and it follows Oskar Schindler, sort of an observer of the war, a loyal member of the German party, as he changes his tune from I'm not getting involved, or I don't like a certain section of people, to here I am trying to save them to make pots and pans in my factory. And you can't send them to the gas chambers because these are my workers. And he tries to save as many as he could. And I think it's culminated in the one of the best endings of any film, where Oskar Schindler just looks at his watch and he's like, I could have saved two more. And that's just, one, it's heartbreaking. Two, it's very, very real. And three, just this everything about this movie is, I think this is probably one of the most perfect movies of all time. Um, Liam Neeson in this role. If you say to someone now, oh man, did you see that Liam Neeson movie about the World War II? They'd be like, I don't want to watch that. He was in Taken and Among the Tombstones and Non-Stop, and Cold Pursuit, but like Liam Neeson was a serious actor at one point, and oh my goodness, if you haven't seen this movie, what a movie! I've seen this about 25 times. I know that's a lot.
No, that's totally fair. I hadn't even, for whatever reason, I don't really regard Schindler's List as big of a war movie just because it has that survivalist instinct that honestly something like Grave of the Fireflies kind of has to it. But in a way, it works a lot better in this one, not just because it's rooted in true life facts and it's just so shocking that the majority of this stuff happened again. And I don't know how many survivors would genuinely appreciate every aspect of the movie, because there are some people who don't really hold Oscar Schindler in real life as that big of a hero, just because there is that whole "we could have saved more" debate,
Yeah.
or if he was really doing it with good intent or just trying to take advantage of their situation. But as a movie, that I could have gotten morphing.
So powerful.
It's just, yeah, absolutely. And people give war movies crap for being incredibly formulaic, and they absolutely are, but
Mm-hmm.
there are tropes that work so well as long as you capture them with the same amount of passion, respect, and skill to your craft as the ones that we've chosen on these lists. Because a lot of these movies that we've chosen have a lot of exact similar things going for it. They all have a very similar message where we can't save everyone, but the important thing is that we save someone, which is something that I think a lot of our picks really have in common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you also have the girl in the red coat as the only color in it. That's very iconic. You have the real life survivors in
Something
the actual
something
movie at the end.
something I find really weird is that the red girl might have actually been by accident. At least some people keep
Huh.
saying it was an accident, but they just went with it because of how iconic of an image that would be. Because apparently the candles at the beginning of the movie were also like the only color in there as red,
Hmm.
which just serves again as a great visual symbol for the amount of death and destruction that was going on at that point.
Yeah, but I adore this movie. I think it's honestly one of the best made films of all time. Like from point A to point B, it's so well made,
It's
and
definitely up
it
there.
makes logical sense. It's also historical, so I hope it won some Oscars. I didn't really check.
Well, Schindler's List did win Best Picture.
Oh, that works.
It got Spielberg his first Best Director, and he got his
Good.
second and last Best Director, oddly enough, for Saving Private
Yeah,
Ryan of all things.
yeah. You do a historical piece. The Academy listens, eh?
Why do you think? Why do you think Warhorse got nominated for Best Picture and nothing else?
Okay, why Warhorse? I've watched that. It's fine. I don't see anything spectacular about it. It's okay.
I I honestly have no idea, but hey, I mean, whatever does it for you. It's
It's
just
not a bad film. It's just not that good.
no, and Spielberg's been hit and miss lately. There are some recent movies of his I enjoyed, like the BFG, and there are others where I just got nothing out of it and didn't even think it was a Spielberg movie like Ready Player One.
I got nothing out of Ready Player One. Okay, it had some fun sequences. I like the
Me
racing
neither.
sequence with King Kong, but other than that, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and like it's also one of the reasons I'm looking forward to his version of West Side Story, because for
Mm,
one, he's never actually done a musical.
yeah.
It's literally like the only genre he hasn't done, because even George Lucas, Scorsese, and Coppola have all done musicals.
Howard the
Not
Duck
that they
did a
should
musical,
have.
right?
Not that they should have. Well, like Coppola did Finian's Rainbow, Scorsese did New York, New York. George Lucas technically did Strange Magic because for some reason he
Mm.
wanted to do that for decades. Don't ask me why. It's George
I
Lucas.
don't ask George Lucas many questions why. That man is rich and retired and spending time with his family, and we just let him be.
Kind of retired when
Kind
he's
of, I
not
guess.
bitching and moaning about how people did slightly better with his material than he did. Slightly.
Well, if he's upset, he sold it, so whatever. He shouldn't have sold it then.
I
I would still love George Lucas to come back and do a prequel trilogy or like a standalone Star Wars movie. I really think, or like anything, do any Star Wars movie and see what he would do. With Lawrence Kasdan again. You got to get them together and then see what happens. Because that's was the magic of Empire and Return of the Jedi. Lawrence Kasdan and George Lucas together.
there's a very interesting video essay about how Francis Ford Coppola made a lot of failures in his life, but they were failures that he was passionate about and still made as close to his vision as he possibly can, compared to George Lucas, who has a shit ton of a ton of success, but didn't really accomplish much of what he set out to be. He really wanted to be a small-time independent filmmaker who just had a ton of control. And then once he struck gold on this, he turned into the very thing that he openly despised, being a studio head who makes a lot of choices. Like he's well aware of the irony and everything. He's just glad that he can make people happy in a certain regard. And I like that about him too, but it does make you wonder what would have happened if he had led the same path as the other directors that he's compared to.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of good and bad in George Lucas's career. But
For sure.
at least he did make Darkman with Liam Neeson.
What is it with you and Darkman?
I love Darkman, but it's a piece of crap. He made it
Okay.
in like '94. I think it was his biggest movie after Schindler's List, and then he dropped off the map. So
You
So,
went
yeah.
from being Oscar nominated to doing a
Darkman.
Sam Raimi original superhero movie.
It's actually pretty cool, but dumb.
Yeah, I
But
believe
yeah.
that.
So, Tyler, it's come to the end of the show. We've rambled a bunch. We've got
Yeah.
what can we check out from you? What new reviews are coming soon or up now that we can go watch you review?
Well, right now you can check out my reviews of the new Disney Plus comedy Flora and Ulysses, which
Yeah.
is as dumb as it sounds, but is also not as dumb as it sounds. It's really hard to explain, which is also probably why it took 15 minutes for me to sum it up. Because there were things I legitimately liked about it and things that you already knew what to expect, judging by the reaction I said with Disney Plus. And the other is I finally checked out A24's Minari because Tiff had a very limited 2-night screening of the film. And you'll get to find out whether or not I believe it deserves the hype that it's gotten, or if it's still pretty good. It's really up for you to click on the video and decide for yourself. I'm not sure what's coming up next. I want to check out the Tom and Jerry movie just to see how good or bad it is. Because I'm willing to bet.
I love to death, but she's just been really striking out lately with Clouds in the Sky, and I don't know. Tom and Jerry looks like. Oh my!
Have you
God,
actually
I don't
seen
know.
Shadow in the Cloud yet, or?
Yeah, I watched it the other night.
And was I right about it?
Yeah, I try to forget it exists.
So do I, but it's
I
not going
streamed
to
it
happen.
illegally online just so I could get it because I had to see how bad this thing was.
But yeah, I'm either going to have a review of the Tom and Jerry movie or the new Netflix/Amazon, wherever it is in Canada, movie. I Care a Lot, about Rosamund Pike, a con artist being hunted down by, I think, Peter Dinklage.
That sounds a lot better than Tom and Jerry, but it also sounds a lot like Tom and Jerry.
Yeah, it kind of does.
Yeah,
There won't be
yeah.
any
Oh,
slapstick,
I don't
unfortunately.
know. I wish that Chloe Grace Moretz would make better movies. That's all I'm saying.
I've lost track of what's coming out now. It's
I
just
mean, if
so
you look at her
embarrassing.
track record, ever since like, oh my goodness,
Kick-Ass 2.
The Shadow in the Cloud. She did Tom and Jerry coming up. She made The Fifth Wave.
Right.
She did oh my goodness, what was that
Movie 43.
Oh, well, that, I'm not blaming her for that one. Everyone was in that movie. You could
Hey,
blame.
they could have said no.
Hugh
Hey, they
Jackman
could have
for
said
that.
no to being guilt tripped.
Yeah, but Hugh Jackman was in that, so you know, yeah, that was awkward. What was that darn movie she did? I don't know. Oh, the one with Johnny Depp as the vampire. That was really bad.
What?
Um,
Oh, wait, she was in Dark Shadows?
yeah, she was in Dark Shadows.
Oh my god.
But like, just a bad track record lately. I hope she does better.
She needs to at this point.
Because I feel like, and I will say this every time, I feel like in 20, 30 years, she'll be the next Meryl Streep, just be like really big and doing these Oscar movies.
Didn't you say that about Kristen Stewart or something like that?
No, just Chloe Grace Moretz. I think Kristen Stewart is already doing really great movies. Personal Shopper is pretty interesting. Weird, but interesting.
Fair enough.
So,
Fair enough.
yeah. But yeah, that brings us to the end of the show. Check out all our content on Really Bad TV. We got Community Cast, Working Professional, Vinyl Madness. A new episode of Really Bad TV coming your way soon. I'm working on it. Green screen is tougher than I thought. And we will see y'all on the flip side. Tyler, say something awesome.
John Leguizamo and Michael Pena have both done Dora the Explorer movies.
Yes.
Put
they
that
will.
into perspective.
I love Dora the Explorer. Swiper, no swiping. It's that's Danny Trejo, so that's how I love it.
Ah, man.